Hey, here's some ideas on how to kind of vary things and come up with new poses and things like that. And one is you might call outside in. And I use all kinds of techniques like this, trying to keep things interesting and trying to create new poses that I haven't done before. So for example, if you indicate a torso like so, the typical approach is to start the limbs coming out from the torso. Well, another way to do it is you come in from the end of the limb. So the foot, the hand, the hand. See? And that's the kind of thing that you might not come up with extending out from the torso. Another thing, hand. See, a lot of times foot. A lot of times you don't necessarily do overlaps, but women especially, there's a tendency for things to, limbs to arc inward. With men, it's more limbs tend to arc outward. Now see, if that's a foot, what's that going to do? Well, see, here's another foot. See, so that's an interesting pose that might not have come up with another way. And basically, as you know, once you got this simple mannequin, it's pretty easy just to flesh things out. So that's one. Another one that I've found extremely useful, one thing about drawing is that, you know, a dot is one-dimensional, a line is two-dimensional, 3 dots is a triangle, and that's basically also, well, no, I'm sorry. One-dimensional, two-dimensional. Anyway, triangles are useful because I'll show you. Here's a torso. It's flat. Here's hips. Here's a thigh. Here's another thigh. Here's an arm. Here's an arm. Here's the back coming up to the base of the skull. Here's the head. Another triangle. And you notice what happens with the triangles. It's like when the triangle ends and you want to do the other limb, you set it into that at an angle, right? So, for example, you wouldn't attach the triangle to the end. Well, you might if it was going out, but if it's bending, it goes under, like so. Feet, triangle, triangle, triangle. Hand, triangle, triangle. And when it comes to fleshing out the torso, you can make the bottom of the rib cage a triangle also. And this is really good for keeping things interesting. And the beauty of it is that in some sense, there really are triangles involved all over the place. That's the way muscles operate in the leg. You know, they're coming from 2 points down to 1 point, and so on. So that's one also. Another approach is you might call swirling or ovals. And people can get in trouble with scribbling if they don't have a good background with anatomy and mannequins and so on. But once you do have that, then scribbling, you're less likely to get yourself in trouble with it. And what will happen is that you should be getting figures that are more fluid. And you notice this one is more, well, you know, there's a different way of doing things. So, I mean, just the swirl approach, depending on how far you take it, and you might call it scribbling too. But you see, you can also come to any of these and apply that as well. And actually, once you start swirling it, you might find, oh, I want to change this. Oh, I want to change that. I want to change this. And you know, it's perfectly okay to do that too. And now I actually got a pose which I think is a little more interesting. Now, one thing about Frazetta and his poses, they were very, very good. And he basically would scribble things out on a very small scale. And that's another approach too. It's like the smaller that you draw something, the more simplified it becomes. There's no way around how, you know, you can't make it complicated. And I've done a lot of drawings where I will take, you know, I've got my sheet of paper here, and I'll do a tiny figure up here in the corner and then enlarge it here. And taking that to, you know, to a larger interpretation makes things different and interesting also. Now also the balance line, which usually travels through the pit of the sternum. You can use that to create nice dynamic poses. There's also an arc called the parabolic arc, parabola. And the parabola is basically, if, like, for example, if you threw a baseball, it would go like this, and then it would drop off at the end. And that's a parabola. So you can create figures based on parabolas, and you get wonderfully fluid quality to them. Now, what I also suggest is that if you have things coming away, have them come off at a right angle from where they are in the parabola. See? So that could be fleshed out in an interesting way also. Another thing is, let me see what I call it. Basically, what's in front of what? Something is always in front of something else. So say, for example, if you were drawing a woman from behind, you say, okay, here's a buttock, but the leg is coming toward us. And the other leg is also coming toward us, and the feet are coming toward us. The other buttock is going away from us. The upper torso is going away from us. The arm is on the other side, and the head is also further away. See? Where everything is always, one thing is in front of another, and they're disappearing in, what's the word? It's late here, dude. They're going into the distance, basically. Now you can do the same thing with male figure. Start with a fist, forearm, upper arm, pec, another pec, and this pec's in front of that one, this is in front of that. Everything's in front of something else. And so on. Leg is coming in front of that. Arm is going away. This is something that Jack Kirby used to great effect. Everything is always in front of something else, and what you use to show that is the T shape, where one line meets another. See here, T, 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 T's. It's loaded with them, and you notice that this has a good bit of dimensionality to it beyond where the other ones, well, this one does too, but, and so does this, but, you know, some poses are flatter. And so if you want to get away from that, make sure that you've got things, one thing in front of another. So anyway, I'll leave it there for now.